Hello, Internet. My philosophical views fall into the metaphysical naturalism camp. I think the best arguments and evidence point strongly away from superstitions, supernaturalistic, and religious worldviews, and strongly towards the conclusion that the world we inhabit and everything in it, including everything about us, is all physical stuff. There's no magic, there are no immaterial entities, no ghosts, and no magical gods. The biggest problems we face in the world boil down to a thankless war with entropy, trying to turn the chaos of the physical world into something palatable for people to be fulfilled and at peace with this side of death. There are many arguments and evidence that go into constructing this worldview, and there are many arguments against it. Today I'd like to focus on just one argument against naturalism. It's called the knowledge argument, specifically targeted against physicalism. And physicalism is the view that there is no soul or spirit in any traditional sense of those terms, and that the mind itself is just what the physical brain does, and no more. The knowledge argument is a thought experiment designed to show that physicalism cannot account for our basic brute subjective experience. It means something that it is like something to be a conscious entity, and that this knowledge stands outside of what metaphysical naturalism, physicalism, and even science supposedly can account for. As Wikipedia puts it, the experiment describes Mary, a scientist who exists in a black and white world where she has extensive access to physical descriptions of color, but no actual human perceptual experience of color. The central question of the thought experiment is whether Mary will gain new knowledge when she goes outside the black and white world and experiences seeing in color. And oftentimes red is the choice color experience used in various online descriptions of the thought experiment. And first off, science is built on collected individual observation of the world. The experience of redness is already a part of that. If physicalism is true, it would seem that the explanation for the experience of redness is beyond the comprehension of our species. Much of our technology is already beyond the scope of what can reasonably be explained to an average human adult. The human brain is the most sophisticated physical construction of matter that we know of in existence. A manual with precise instructions for how to make a qualia machine, and one that specifically generates the experience of redness, would likely be beyond the scope of what any of us can understand. Physicalism might be false, but if it were true, what I've explained is probably true, and the knowledge argument isn't where the debate turns. The knower of red must also be a particular kind of knower that can know red. There are specific areas of the brain dedicated to processing certain colors. If you dink with those areas, the knower can no longer know red if they haven't perceived it before. People who are colorblind are having a different qualia experience. Something is off with the physical construction of their eyes. It's not like they keep seeing red because the mind is spirit, and the spirit is always going to see the unavoidable, proper, magical color that bizarrely corresponds with a given physical wavelength. You change the brain, or the eyes in this case, something physical, you change the qualia. Qualia is the activity of the brain. It is ultimately an action. The apparent property inconsistency is an illusion created by just how sophisticated and bizarre it is to be that activity. But the experience of qualia does not make you an expert in its underlying metaphysics, one way or the other. So there are kinds of knowledge that are nowhere compatible, and Mary, in the thought experiment, is not up to the task. No offense, Mary, no one else is either. A toddler cannot be informed about higher concepts as their brain simply cannot process them accurately, but if we upgraded their brain or just let them grow up, they can then know the concept. Redness is an arbitrary convention of human brains adapted to distinguish one color from another, or rather one wavelength from another. There may be an infinite number of ways to designate a mental experience of whichever electromagnetic wavelength that our brains process as red. Hence, you have to know how to build our brains and be able to do so in addition to knowing the standard model of physics. Similarly, in the future, we'd expect that there will be cyborgs and artificial intelligence that may not know what human red is. They may well be able to swap qualia files and download experiences from the internet cloud, but they'll also have to purchase upgrades to their brains in order to see redness for themselves. Or perhaps they'll have the internal tech to make the necessary adjustments automatically. But you'd have to have all of that info and all of that necessary tech to know everything about red in physicalist terms. And then presumably the AI would be able to hypothetically model the experience of red in what we would call its imagination without actually ever looking at anything in the outside world that humans perceive as red. If anything out there is if anyone out there is at the very least uncertain as to whether or not qualia is really magic or mechanical, then please let the mountain of evidence that the mind is completely at the mercy of the physical construction of the brain sway your judgment. And compare that to how many supernatural mind-related claims have failed to garner a science behind them, despite a sizable chunk of scientists being religious and having biases towards those conclusions. The brain could have been discovered to be useless stocking stuffer, and disembodied mental powers of some sort could abound. But that is just not the real world. Mental events are probably just biological computation. Evolution has been reworking the brain for hundreds of millions of years. We're not going to be able to understand its construction and how that exactly produces our experiences tomorrow. One day, there may be sophisticated AI that can hear about a new form of qualia and instantly adapt their brains to be able to process it as a first-person experience and understand the intricacies of exactly what they are doing and why. They will make the ideal Mary for a more accurate knowledge argument. They will likely be able to scale their knowledge to effortlessly include any necessary mental qualia adaptations. Uploading data into their brains apart from any experience of the world will include qualia files. There is no reason to think such a venture would be in the purview of current philosophical discussion, even if physicalism happens to be wrong. Current popular thought experiments trying to pin physicalism here are just too simplistic. And beware, the ancient Greek philosophers came up with all sorts of paradoxes based on what they thought they knew. Unfortunately, what they thought they knew wasn't that much, and that meant they backed themselves into all sorts of nonsense and absurdities. Things that school children can easily point out today. One would think something similar is going on here with people stuck on thinking that experience is some radically different substance than the rest of the physical world, when it just probably isn't. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments.